Thank you all, and welcome to the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society at the 92nd Street Y. Now, we've had, over the years, an American president. We've had several Supreme Court justices as our guests. We've had Oscar winners, Pulitzer Prize winners, Tony winners. But I don't think we've ever showcased an event this important. It really is the perfect convergence of art and public health. It is an incredibly original program, and we're really honored. And I think all of you will leave here enlightened, enriched, and better off. It all starts with my friend Brian Dories, who a number of years ago started the Theater of War Project, in which he assembled this incredible A-team of American actors, a rotating, ever-replenishing cast of them. The two of the most famous and of the original cast are here with us tonight. And they toured military bases around the world, performing Greek tragedies, in an effort to heal the wounded, to call attention to the moral injuries that come from war, for combat veterans and their spouses and their families and generals. And then, of course, the project morphed, expanded, so that they were performing different pieces of Greek drama to correction officers and prisoners and hospice workers and medical students and doctors, and drug addicts, domestic violence survivors, survivors of tornadoes and hurricanes. This is really an incredible project that Brian has put together. And yes, it is, this book is available for sale. It's the story of how this came together is really contained in this book. It's a personal memoir, and yet it's more than that. It's a book of self-help, and it's actually more than that. It's a book of psychology, and yet it's somehow more than that. It's a book of literary criticism, and it's yet more than that. And it's actually a love letter, and it's actually more than that.
That's going on the back of the next paperback.
It's more than all those things. And yes, that was recorded. For everyone know, we'll be seeing that again.
Yes.
And of course, for so many people, two of America's finest and favorite actors, David Strathairn and Paul Giamatti, are here. You know them from TV also, not just from Billions, but you also know David from The Blacklist. And we've known them from their Academy Award nominated performances in feature films. David is a friend of the Forum. He was here for our Folks Film Festival a number of years ago when we screened Good Night and Good Luck, and that was the film for which he received an Academy Award nomination as the portrayal for Edward R. Murrow. And Paul actually was our opening night guest for a few years, for opening night for John Adams. Wow. And the thing is, he was called away on a film, and he couldn't make it. But let me say, this audience in particular knows what the word mensch means. This is a mensch. Now, this guy, John Adams, couldn't show up, but he called Abigail Adams, he called George Washington, he called Thomas Jefferson, he called George Washington, he called Benjamin Franklin. He called every one of our founding fathers to try to get someone to replace him. But he's here tonight, we're grateful. Good. And Paul, you may not know this, but you're probably coming back next year. We're going to do Billions. We've talked to Showtime. Oh, cool. Okay. So we're going to be back with him.
All right.
You've all seen this show, right? Yeah. Here, check this out. I hate Bobby Axelrod.
Oh, goodness.
That was my impersonation of Paul Giamatti. There will be more of that. I will filter them through when appropriate.
Really?
Okay. It's my also way of auditioning for Theater of War.
Yeah.
In case he can't make it. You know, in Kuwait, they don't know who he is.
Right. That was awesome.
So let's start with Brian. Brian, what did the ancient Greek dramatists understand about tragedy, dramatic theater, that high school English teachers don't understand, that Broadway producers don't understand? What is it that we've missed in not wanting to know these plays that you have not only you've done this incredible public health project, but you've resuscitated the life out of plays that many people would never have seen again, certainly not servicemen, and you've given this a new life. So what is it about these plays that are so magical and important for this purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I knew what Greek tragedy was about. I studied it in college, I had a vision for what I thought it could be for contemporary audiences. It wasn't until I heard military audiences responding to Greek plays that I started to see that they had an insight into the plays that I didn't. And one of the insights came early on in our touring. We were on a German artillery base, an American base in Germany, and I asked a question of the audience after one of our performances: why do you think Sophocles wrote this play and staged it for his community, a play about a warrior who loses his best friend in combat and then takes his life in grief and in shame? And before I could really get even the question out, a young man shot up his hand and he said, I think he wrote the play to boost morale. And I returned to the young man. I said, well, what's morale boosting about watching someone come unraveled and fall apart and end his life? And before I finished saying that, the young man shot back, the young enlisted soldier, because it's the truth. And because, he added, we're all sitting here as a community, shoulder to shoulder, acknowledging it. And for me, that was a paradigm-shifting moment. I think we think of tragedy as this supreme expression of pessimism by a culture that was trying to articulate the futility of human agency in a world in which we barely apprehend the forces upon us, working upon us, governments, chance, luck, fate. But in fact, that's what happens on stage. The plays are pessimistic. But the question I started asking was, to what end? What's happening in the audience? And I think if you stand in the Theater of Dionysus, which I did a few weeks ago with my students in Greece, there's no question that the audience is your master. The audience is raised above you in this way, and that it's joyful, camaraderie building, relieving, ecstatic, transformative to face the darkest aspects of our humanity as a community. And that's what I learned about Greek tragedy.
And you also point out in your book that it also gives them, and you pointed out here with this particular soldier, permission to speak.
That's right. I mean, if I had one word to define Greek tragedy, but also our work, it's permission. And how many different ways can we give you permission to tell your story or to share some harrowing thing that you've never shared in private?
Because it's important to point out to our audience that the key to these productions are not just the performances, but then the actors go into the audience, and then Brian conducts a discussion with the audience, and this would include soldiers, generals, spouses, victims of PTSD, all kinds of hardened, battle-weary people, and they speak about what the play meant to them. And that's a huge part of this, the therapeutic dimension of this. Why do you suppose the Greek dramatists seem to know so much about life and death and trauma and grief? Well, why are they different from our playwrights?
Right, I mean,
they're focused entirely on this.
Yeah, I mean, here's the short answer. At the time that Aeschylus's Oresteia was staged, the most famous trilogy from the ancient world, Athens was at war on 6 fronts. I mean, the Athenians of the 5th century were at war for nearly 80 out of 100 years. If we believe Thucydides, a plague wiped out 1/3 of the Athenian population at the end of the 5th century. There's no one in that audience that would have been a stranger to the types of screaming that were being performed on stage. Wow. And what our audiences say when they come up afterwards, in all the settings you described, is that wasn't high poetry. That was kitchen sink realism.
Wow.
Right? I said that to my spouse in our kitchen last week. At that level of intensity.
There's such an incredible irony. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see tonight.
Yeah, we'll see.
There's such an irony, right?
Yeah.
The ancient Greeks 2,500 years ago knew everything about the emotional complexity of life, and modern Greeks can't balance a checkbook.
Boy,
Get these people an abacus, you know? Yeah. But they mastered life 2,500 years ago, and the simple thing they can't do. David, Paul, you've played characters on film and small screen, big screens on stage that face questions of moral choice. So it's not like you've not played characters with these levels of moral complexity. But I wonder what's in it for you. I mean, I assume your agents never come to you and say, guys, we have a new Euripides play on Broadway, right? Aeschylus, you know, it's for you, it's for you. That never happens. So is this an opportunity to read the words of the ancient Greek tragedy dramatists, or is there something here about the experience that Brian has created that you would get on planes and fly all over the world for a decade to interrupt your shooting schedules and your lives to go do this and to come back. If there's something here, must be here for you, in addition to speaking the words of Sophocles and Aeschylus and Euripides.
You know, it's just what Brian alluded to is what happens in the room or happens in the amphitheater or happens in whatever space we've done it in, you know, the firehouses, you know, homeless shelters, hospitals, the mega churches, you know, wherever it's done, wherever I've been involved in it, what happens in the room is it's quantifiably different than what happens in a commercial venture of a play because the audience is coming there with a different expectation, I believe, or maybe no expectation. And it's also an audience that, for the most part, has been, they come to it because it's about them in some way.
And they all know this.
They sort of know it. They sort of know it.
I don't think
right?
they know what's going to happen in some ways.
No.
Which is also very exciting.
Yeah.
All that structure of what a play or a movie or any of it's going to be like is kind of gone. And where they're doing something really unexpected, it's terrifying stuff to do as well. It's very scary material.
Why? Because you think that it could re-traumatize people, that it so
You have
touches,
no idea what
it touches
you
them
don't know
so,
what they're gonna do.
it touches them so deeply.
You don't know what they're going to do. It permits them to do whatever they want to do.
Right.
You know, I mean, these plays, we read Job to people of a town that was decimated by a tornado, Joplin. And you're reading about a man who's permitted to question God, and we're in a mega church. And I was like, we're going to get lynched. I was like, this one's not going to work. This is going to be the one. This is going to be the one that's going to go really
You
hard.
went too far, Dories.
I was like, Dories, Dories. It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was incredible. Yeah. And the sense of release was amazing. And it's wonderful. We do it, and then we go away.
Right.
And actually, then, the most important part of it happens.
Is it different each time? I mean, are you really there expecting just about anything? And you've had different experiences, saying, for instance, was there one that stands out for you that you did around the world or in the country?
They're all the same, but they're all extraordinarily different
Right.
because the format is such it's a very simple, no bells and whistles. We sit at
It's
the
like
table.
this.
It is like this, but even
It
we
is.
sit at a table, microphones, lights are on. Sometimes it's 10 o'clock in the morning. And so each venue may be different, but I've come to expect something that happens in the room every time that is transformative. And it could be a real subtle little thing. It could be a audience-wide experience. It's one of those intangible things that you feel as a performer when you're really engaged with the material and the audience is listening, with a different level of focus than if they've paid a ticket and they're going to come see something.
Yeah.
Paul, does anything stand out that you remember?
Well, I mean, Dave's done way more of them than I have. But all of them, the Joplin one is the one that to me was kind of remarkable.
And was that the only time you did the Book of Job?
No, you've done Job.
You've done
It's
Job.
It's the only time I've done it. But they've done
David's done Job in Tokyo
Yeah.
for the Fukushima survivors.
Fukushima and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Now, Brian, how is it that you managed to recruit this A-list ensemble of ever replenishing, rotating actors? I mean, these two are among the best, and they're two of America's best-known actors. But it's a pretty substantial, impressive group.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very rare in our profession to feel like you're doing something that's making a difference in people's lives with your craft, and you're not compromising on the quality of what you're doing. I mean, Paul may feel otherwise, but we're using our craft. This isn't signing autographs. This is doing something with what they've trained to do. One of the first actors I ever approached was David. I'd heard that David's wife at one point had been a nurse, and I just had this hunch that he might get the social value of what I was trying to accomplish. So I got his number from a fellow director at the Culture Project downtown who'd worked with him, and I called him one night on his cell phone. And it was a very nervous, awkward call. And he said yes immediately. And he said yes almost every time since, and has done more than almost any other actor in our close to 200 actors who passed through the project. And of course, after David did it, then he and Paul had a gig out in the West Coast doing LA Theater Works, I believe is what you did, some radio play. And he told Paul about it.
Told me about it.
And then Paul joined us.
I wonder, Paul, many people may or may not know that Paul's father was Bartlett Giamatti, the former president of Yale University. So should we assume that at dinner, he was doing lines with you growing up?
Doing lines?
Yeah. That's what I said. I said,
Yeah.
what was confusing? Why is everyone laughing? Running lines. With
Yeah, there we go.
I'm a law professor. Give me a
There we
break.
go, man. Wow.
Aren't you impressed that I said lines at all?
Secrets revealed. Yeah, no.
Yeah, right.
Don't say that because, your dad's not with us anymore.
No, yeah, no.
Was this part of your childhood?
Not the Greek stuff so much, no. So, but it was always very interesting. No.
Right.
It was other stuff, Shakespeare and stuff. You don't really get to do this stuff much. I think there is also the fact that you say, oh, nobody gets to do that stuff. What's it like to do that stuff? And it's explosive stuff, so it's really, but no, it wasn't really a part of my.
So let's do some of this stuff. Oh, before we do this stuff, there was something you mentioned before that I thought you should know, all three of you, and the audience, for those of you who may remember the night we had here at the Y for the film festival, you're going to love this. We had Stephen Breyer, Justice Stephen Breyer. The movie, he picked the movie for himself. In your case, it was obvious. In your case, it was, he wanted to do the film, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Interesting, right? Supreme Court justice, liberal yet, right? This is a movie about frontier justice and guns, and the liberal justice picks that film. So we're talking on stage, I don't know if any of you are here, and he says at one point, he says, well, this film is really part of even Greek drama. This is really out of the Oresteia, right? I had to turn to the audience and say, yes, the Oresteia is the granddaddy of all revenge films or revenge stories. And it was really, I would think, comforting for you to know that even our Supreme Court justices are occasionally influenced by tragic Greek theater, drama, literature.
Sure.
It doesn't come across in legal opinion, but you never know. Right? You never know what he or she has read or seen might actually come into play in a legal decision.
Yeah, sure.
So let's do one of these readings. The first will be with David.
Yeah, sure.
And why don't you and David set it up? This is Sophocles. This is Ajax.
That would be the Greek way of pronouncing it. Yes, but
Ajax.
yes.
You say Ajax, people think it's a detergent.
That's fine.
So
you want to keep expectations very low.
Right. So, Ajax.
Ajax. So this is a speech from Sophocles' Ajax, which is a story of a great respected warrior who in the 9th year of the Trojan War loses his best friend Achilles in battle, slips into a depression, is passed over for an award, the armor of Achilles, which he believes he deserves by his commanding officers, by the generals, and then flies off into a berserk rage in which he tries to kill his commanding officers, ends up killing animals instead, believing them to be the generals. And when he wakes from that dissociative state and discovers what he's done against the pleading of his family and his troops and his brother, he begins to contemplate taking his own life. And this is where we find him in the play at this point.
Ajax, Ajax. My name is a sad song. Who would have thought it would someday become the sound a man makes in despair? Ajax. After Troy, my father Telamon rode home in a victory parade. He made quite a name for himself here in this country, receiving full honors from the army. But now, I, the son, stand in the place where my father once stood, with no less troops and no fewer triumphs, but my body will rot on strange soil, dishonored in front of fellow soldiers. This much I know. If Achilles still lived and decided to hold a contest for his arms, awarding them to the greatest warrior at the end of the day, they would be mine. But the generals gave the arms to a man without morals, ignoring all the times I risked my life to defend them against our enemies. And if my eyes and mind had not been twisted by a sickness, taking me off target, the generals and Odysseus would not have lived to cast their votes, or let alone see the morning. But the relentless, dark-eyed daughter of Zeus ravaged me with madness as I stood beside their beds, and now I have stained my hands with the blood of cows. The men I hunted narrowly escaped through no fault of my own. Now they laugh at me, for with the gods' help, the weak evaded the strong. What should I do now? The gods hate me. The Greeks loathe me. The Trojans despise me. Perhaps I should set sail across the sea, home, leaving behind the ships and men and sons of Atreus. But what will I say to my father, Telamon, when he sees my face? How will he even bear to look at me when I explain how I have disgraced our family name for which he fought so hard? His heart will break right then and there. Should I scale the walls of Troy and face the enemy myself and show them what I'm made of and then die? No, that would only please the generals. I must do something bold to erase all doubt in my father's mind that his son was anything but a coward. When a man suffers without end in sight and takes no pleasure in living his life day to day wishing for death, he should not live out all his years. It is pitiful when men hold on to false hopes. A great man must live in honor or die an honorable death. That's all I have to say.
Well, I have a few thoughts, that some of which comes out of this book that's important
Yeah.
to point out. You know, Sophocles was a general.
Yeah.
And he wrote this, and I think what you heard from David and from what Brian has spoken about around the world is that this piece is really about betrayal.
Yeah.
That Ajax feels betrayed by his commanders, that they rewarded unjustly Odysseus.
Odysseus, Achilles' armor. Yeah.
Right, and gave Achilles' armor to the wrong man,
Yeah.
a man who was basically a con artist. So, you know, we don't talk about insubordination. Right. Sophocles, a general, writes a play in which they're challenging the chain of command.
Yes, that's right.
And I wonder, when you went and did this performance, whether the service people felt the same freedom, permission to speak, to yet speak of betrayal when knowing that the generals were in the front row.
Yeah, I mean, in the ancient context, as you alluded to, the 10 generals, the strategoi, sat in the front row. And the festival of Dionysus, the city of Dionysia, every spring was framed by a ritual with a procession that the generals led. And the plays themselves were preceded with a ritual in which the armor of the war dead was given to the children, the recently orphaned children. And so there was a military frame around this. Some people think, from the archaeological records, that the Greeks sat according to tribe, which was their military unit, and according to rank. And of course, it was 100% compulsory service. So every citizen who was in the audience, up to 17,000 who were watching that play, would have known what this character was speaking to. And yeah, that's it. I mean, if there's one word to define theater of war, it's permission. But if there's one theme that defines both plays that we perform most regularly for military audiences, it's betrayal. And it turns out that betrayal is the wound that cuts the deepest, and the one that maybe our clinical approach to trauma doesn't necessarily always have the right approach to, or is unable to reach the moral and spiritual dimensions of betrayal. And something about the plays gives not just permission to the audiences that we perform for, from the Pentagon to homeless shelters, to speak, but also a vocabulary and a syntax with which to speak. But it's really a reclaiming of their own language. They're the translators. We're there to listen and learn what the plays are about from them.
But, you know, when you think that Sophocles wrote this, that's one way of saying, look, he was willing to be challenged. But the Department of Defense gave you a contract.
Yes.
I mean, there was cash on a table by men with medals all over who said, bring your actors all over the world and bring it. Leave it all on the table.
That's right.
And we'll deal with the consequences. Give them an opportunity to see Ajax in this pain and feeling this levels of bitterness and resentment. So if I had a general here, would he say, if I had a person from the Pentagon, would I say this was well worth spent because in fact we are better off today because of theater of war?
Yeah, I mean, look, the military is a very large organization. There are people on all sides of this question. There are people who love what we do and people who don't. People who are threatened by the very nature of the exercise, which is threatening. It does call into question the chain of command.
I think it's shocking
and people
that
who
they let you do this.
And people who understand as leaders that in order to actually be good leaders, you have to create leaderless moments. You have to validate the perspectives of your subordinates. One of the people who's in the audience tonight, I believe, is General Lori Sutton, who's the commissioner of Mayor's Office of Veterans Affairs for New York City. And Lori was our Athena. It wasn't a male general who gave us the green light and saw the value in this. It was a female general with only one star on her lapel who took a huge risk and saying, you know what, at this point where it's a career-ending gesture in the military in 2007, 2008, to raise your hand and say, I have an invisible wound, we've got to think outside the box. And the idea behind Theater of War and the scale to which we took it, 100 performances in 1 year, that first year was, we're going to mount a public health campaign using Greek tragedy. And the core message of the campaign is, if you felt anything that David just expressed in any way, at any level of the spectrum, you're not alone. And you're not only not alone in this community, you're not alone across the country, because we're going to do this everywhere, and you're not alone across time. And that was the core message. And what happens is that what we see night after night is a palpable sense of relief when people discover that they're not the only people to have felt and thought these things.
And there's a timeless component. It connects them not just to the present time experience of battle, but to the ancient Greek warriors who experienced these very same feelings. And in fact, in your book, you point out, during the discussion, people raised their hand and said, I am Ajax, right? They'll actually say, I am that character.
Yeah, they can step out from behind the metaphor and the archetype and say, I am Ajax, but they can also stay behind it. And it's not coercive in that way. I mean, it's definitely coercive, but it's not coercive in the way of, we're gonna ask you a follow-up question about what you just said. People get up and they speak in very coded ways, or they step out from behind and say, this was my story and here's why, and they put it all on the line.
So one of the pieces we're not going to hear tonight, Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, which is, of course, the story of Prometheus who'd given humankind fire, and as punishment, Zeus consigns him to being a prisoner chained to a rock at the end of the earth, and he suffers through incredible amounts of pain and torture, basically, his entire life. And since he's a god, he doesn't die, so it's an endless, he can't even be put out of his misery.
Yeah.
And you've taken this to prisons.
Yeah.
You even took it to Guantanamo Bay.
Yes.
To Guantanamo, I'm going to say that again. He took it to Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, a 4-star general made it mandatory for everyone who was off duty at the time we were there to see Brian O'Byrne, a Tony Award-winning Irish actor who was in Doubt on Broadway, play Prometheus alongside Bill Irwin, the MacArthur winner, the clown, playing Hephaestus, and this other terrific cast. And we had CIA, FBI, guards, corrections on both sides of all the camps, psychologists, Marines who guard the border, the sort of Jack Nicholson guy who is...
You want me on that wall.
Yeah, exactly. He was there. And we did this play. And we then said, well, what do you think? Have you ever seen Prometheus? And the response that came back, and it comes back in Supermax prisons where we perform mostly for the guards and the corrections officers, is I'm Prometheus. I'm the one who's chained to this rock at the end of the earth, who's judged as a pariah by everyone, including those in the military. I didn't choose this assignment. I can't even talk about it with my family. Whether I agree with it or not is immaterial. I'm here. Later in that same discussion, a Marine talked about his desire to kill our detainees, the enemies on the other, get them back on enemy soil. And in that same discussion, a guard talked about being assaulted by the detainees. And in that same discussion, a JAG lawyer stood up and he said, we've lost all moral authority until we give these detainees due process and fair trials. And in the front row was a 4-star general and the admiral who commanded Gitmo. And to our knowledge, no one was punished because they were just talking about a play at the end of the day. And that's how, the other thing about this that I've learned, we didn't know this starting out, is that tragedy in particular as a form can dissolve hierarchy. And we know that our projects are working when the person you least suspect is going to speak. The private in front of the general, the hospice nurse in front of the dean of Harvard Medical School, the food service worker in front of the warden gets up and speaks the truth. Not just truth to power, but the truth of their experiences in a way that becomes validated and heard. And the plays somehow do that. I'm still not 100% sure how, but that's why all of our projects are tragedies, because they seem to, because we can predict at least that effect if we're doing our job the right way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about the Guantanamo Bay piece because in the book, you point out about how Prometheus Bound really speaks to questions of solitary confinement.
Yeah.
And the new literature about solitary confinement, the torturous aspect of it,
Yeah.
or indefinite detentions,
Yeah.
right? And there's one scene where you describe one of the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay screaming,
Yeah.
and one of the things he's screaming about is that he doesn't know if he'll ever see his family again. It's indefinite.
He was also being force-fed while we
It was
were
also,
there.
right, and force feeding was another piece of this.
Yeah, which we witnessed. Yeah.
So another area in which this comes up, Sophocles' women of Trachis, right, of course, Trachis. And that's really the story of Heracles, who is poisoned by his wife. That happens a lot, by the way, in Greek tragedy.
Well, she thinks it's a love potion.
I know, it's a sad, it's a tragedy, really.
Yeah.
She didn't mean to kill him, but
Yeah.
she ended up poisoning him, and there's no antidote. And so he asks his young son, who is dying to have a relationship with his father, and this is the first time he has one, and he says, I want you to kill me. I want you to assist me in assisted suicide.
He actually says, and that's very close, he says, I want you to be my iater. I want you to be my doctor.
Doctor, I love that.
By burning me alive.
Burning me alive.
And my suffering.
Right, and my suffering.
Yeah.
So the son is faced with the choice of either I carry out my father's wishes and relieve him of his suffering, or I kill my father.
Yeah,
right?
and be haunted by Furies forever.
For the rest of Vengeance side, as Orestes was.
So this is great. There's a theory that Greek drama was a form of training for 19-year-olds, late adolescents who are matriculating both into the military and into civic participation. And I love this because that explains why we have so many young characters in these plays: Orestes, Antigone, Electra, Pentheus, Neoptolemus, Hylas. The list goes on, who are thrust into these ethically impossible situations for which there are no right answers, and by which, no matter what they do, they'll be haunted for the rest of their lives. Right. It seems like the Greeks were saying, this is what characterizes adult life. And you better get ready, because you're about to go to war and you're going to face it on the battlefield, and the plague is going to ravage our country, and you're going to have to make similar choices where you're going to have to live with the consequences, even if you had the right intentions. And I think that's why they speak to moral injury, this idea of betrayal that Jonathan Shea speaks about so brilliantly in Achilles in Vietnam. He calls moral injury the betrayal of what's right in a high-stakes situation. And I think all of our audiences deal with life and death in high-stakes situations in which they have to make these decisions, and that's why the plays speak to them.
You also said in the book, you point out that while we are taught Greek drama as matters of pure fate, that in fact, really what the plays do, we're taught Greek drama tragedies wrong, incorrectly. Brian says, look, they're really about choice.
Yeah.
They're really about change, that giving people the potential, the redemptive possibility of change. And that is a very powerful idea. We read in high school, we think, oh, well, it's all fate.
Yeah.
The gods are messing with us.
Yeah.
But in fact,
we're screwed.
We're screwed. There's nothing we can do. But change can come about. Redemption could come about. And I love what you said about Heracles, because what he's really saying is that the drama itself is healing,
Yeah.
right? That there's the potential for therapeutic healing comes from these plays. I wonder if we can speak to this.
No, it's amazing. In the play Philoctetes,
Yeah.
which
Yeah, we were about to
there's an
do.
amazing, the most amazing thing to me about that play is at the end when they finally rescue this man who's been abandoned on an island, suffering with this horrible wound for 10 years.
Yeah.
And they leave him alone, but he's going to finally get off, and he's been accepted back, sort of. And he bids farewell to this island, this prison, that is this theater of his ordeal that he's been transformed in. It's incredible. I mean, it's a really beautiful, amazing thing. You know, I mean, it's amazing.
And
The acknowledgement, that's incredible.
right, and the redemptive dimensions.
The power he has to acknowledge.
Yeah, I mean, the part that you're referencing in my book may be the self-help part. It may be the part where it's just my take on the world filtered, Greek tragedy filtered through it. I had a long, agonizing fight with my father, who died 5 years ago, about he was a psychologist, and he believed, he's a behaviorist, like one of the last Skinnerian, we had a rat lab and down the street from our house, and a polygraph machine we played with as kids, and a human brain and formaldehyde. That was our playground.
You didn't go out and throw football with your
Yeah,
dad.
exactly. No. He did trip one time, and the brain went sliding down the hall, and they had to bring in a hazmat team to the psychology department because it's a carcinogen, formaldehyde. But he held that human beings fundamentally could not change. And he would always lord over me the Greek plays that I loved. Well, don't you see? It's all fate. And even to his dying day, he was saying really sort of ugly things about how my brother and I would meet similar fates to him, and that we couldn't change the course of our lives. And maybe my response to that is to see Greek tragedy. But the question I ask of the tragedies is, yes, they are absolutely dark depictions of the worst aspects of our humanity and the worst things that can happen to us. But I have to believe that one of the things that defines Greek tragedy is characters learning too late, usually milliseconds too late. That if it were just 3 milliseconds before, they wouldn't have destroyed themselves and their families for 6 generations. Why would the Greeks get together for 3 days, 12 hours a day, and watch stories in which people learn milliseconds too late over and over and over again? For me, the answer is to wake us up to the very slim possibility that we can make a change. Now, I'm not saying it's easy or it's possible. That's the self-help. That's a different type of self-help book. But that we can, if we're hyper-vigilant enough, if we're awake enough. And tragedy kind of kicks us in the gut and makes us think about what we might be missing that's coming right over, right in our face.
And if I may just add,
Yeah.
this phenomenon, this is I'm going out on a limb here, but in today's world of a kind of a dissociative infrastructure of communication, that in their world, they were doing it like we're doing it tonight, that you sense this a cohesion, or at least you're sharing something in the space, in the actual community of your fellow man, that in a way is another essential part of healing, I think, because it's really hard to, physician heal thyself. You can't do it in isolation.
Everybody's present.
Yeah, and the presence of the experience and the issues and the discussion, I think, is one of those intangible things that has extraordinary power.
Maybe it's because these pieces were intended to be performed. They don't have the same power on the page. I mean, if you have David and Paul, they come alive in ways that just can't be done. And they were designed for the whole community to come out, that it was a shared collective experience that they all witnessed at the same time, and they all felt the same kinds of emotional connection. Let's do Philoctetes. And Brian, you're going to be reading on this too.
I am.
Do you want to set this up?
Budgetary reasons, yeah.
Paul also set it up a little, but maybe...
I did. I'm going to try to do a very freeze-dried version because it's a complicated story, but Philoctetes is a story of a combat veteran who, on the way to Troy, leading the Greek armada to Troy, is bitten by a snake. It has this mysterious illness that overtakes him, and it becomes, within a very short period of time, so repugnant to his fellow soldiers His wound becomes infected, his screaming becomes so intolerable that the Greeks decide to abandon him on a deserted island for 9 years. And they go to Troy, they fight the war. In the 9th year of the war, they discover that from an oracle, the only way to win the war is to go back and get him and his invincible weapon, this bow and arrow he was given by Heracles. And for actually helping euthanize Heracles, which is another version of the women of Trachis story. He lit the match. So in this scene, which is the sort of burning center of the play, this young boy named Neoptolemus, an ephebe, a late adolescent, a 19-year-old, who was the son of Achilles, is given the assignment by Odysseus, who's the man who abandoned Philoctetes in the first place, to deceive the wounded warrior, to win his trust, and then to get the weapon and use it against him, because every second that passes, more men are dying. So Neoptolemus, it does really well for the first third of the play, and then about halfway through, he's confronted by what his mission actually means in the face of another human being's suffering. And that's the setup to our scene. I'll be reading Neoptolemus to Paul. What's wrong?
That's nothing, son. That's nothing. Go ahead of me.
What is it, the pain of your affliction?
No, it's passing. See, I'm already feeling better. Oh, gods!
Why are you groaning to the gods?
I am asking them to show some mercy.
What's the matter? Why won't you tell me? You seem like you're in trouble.
No. I wanted to keep the pain to myself. But now it cuts straight through me. Do you understand? It cuts straight through me. I am being eaten alive. If you have a sword, chop it off. Take my foot off. I want it off. I want it off.
What is this pain that all of a sudden strikes so quickly?
You know, my boy.
No, what is it?
How could you know?
I can't bear to look at your condition.
I know. It's terrible. It is beyond words. Please take pity on me.
What do you want me to do?
She comes when I have wandered too far. And if I am still, she goes, do not abandon me.
You wretched man, unlucky in all ways, should I hold you in my arms?
No, not that. The bow, take it, as you asked just now, and keep it safe while I sleep until the pain also sleeps beside me. And if they come, I beg you, my son, do not let them take it from you, or we both shall die.
Do not be afraid, but hand it to me. I will care for it as if it were my own. No one will take it.
There, it is in your hands. Kiss it to avoid the curse that brought the trouble to me and the ones before.
I pray that the gods grant us safe passage wherever we may be going.
I have a sinking feeling, son, that your prayer will not be honored by the gods. For as we speak, the blood is oozing from the sore, a dark red sign of evil things to come. The pain swells underneath my foot. I feel it moving upward, tightening my chest. Oh, gods, I am wretched. Don't go, please don't go. Please don't go. You understand? You know. Oh! Stay with me. I wish they could feel this. Odysseus and the generals. Death! 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 Where are you? Why, after all these years of calling, have you not appeared? Son, my noble son, take my body and scorch it in a burning fire. As I once burned the honor of the bow you now hold in your hand. Why this silence? Say something. Where have you gone, my son?
Your pain is painful to observe.
It comes as quickly as it goes. Be brave, son. I beg you to stay.
Don't worry, we will stay.
You will?
Without a doubt.
It is not right to make you swear an oath.
It is not right to leave you here alone to die.
Paul, I cannot help but observe that the usual Paul Giamatti character that we see in all of your performances, you know, we've talked about this before. My favorite Paul.
Great imitation.
I'm gonna do another one. I'm about to. He invited me to do another one. The one in John Adams when John Adams meets for the first time the King George III is my favorite scene. You know, he said, "Never, in my wildest dreams, could I have imagined meeting Your Highness in a diplomatic capacity."
Excellent.
Thank you. I'm having so much fun today.
This is the Seder play after the tragedy.
I'm loving this, right? This is so great. Paul, that is not the same controlled, restrained Giamatti performances. Something seemingly, to me, it overtakes you in this performance. I mean, you were weeping. This was not an easy piece, 6 minutes to do.
No, but I mean, they're whatever they are. That's what they are. I mean, that's how powerful. I mean, I don't know, whatever. I appreciate that it gets across, but that's also the idea.
Yeah.
You know, it's what I'm there to do.
Yeah.
I mean,
Do these things. That's what we do. And no, but seriously, I mean, the things themselves just you feel the long dimensions of these things.
but so much,
Essential pain.
right?
Yeah.
Essential pain. But
Essential pain.
so much of this, though, really is about wailing with suffering.
Yeah.
Right?
And-
Both
and
pieces. All of the
Feeling
people.
like you don't want to be abandoned.
Right. And
So
by the way, this
Don't
to
leave me
me.
alone.
Yeah.
How is this not another example of betrayal?
No, it is. At its
Right?
core,
This
it's
is-
more.
This is even
yeah.
worse, almost.
So I'll just say the note that I give Paul and David, although I don't need to give either of them, but I give it to all the actors, and I some of them like it when I whisper it in their ears, is make them wish they'd never come.
Make them uncomfortable. Make them right there.
And you know, that's one thing to do with a mandatory audience that hasn't paid any money, but you know, then a 92nd Street Y audience who has. But there, I thought in the beginning it was about empathy, and it is. I mean, you can't but feel. But at a certain point, the screaming goes on and on and on and on. And in fact, this other play that we do, The Women of Trachis, is even longer. And so then what is it? And I think it's about the fact that once we've all been pushed past our compassion and our capacity to even want to be in the room anymore, then no matter what divides us, all of a sudden we share something that brings us together in this unexpected way. And that's where the permission kind of begins to connect. It's in recognizing our fallibility, our limits. And also, it seems like both plays, Sophocles is saying, you know, if your core value is to never leave someone behind, to be compassionate, to be a good human being, to be good to your fellow humans, look how hard it is to live up to that value when you're in the presence of human suffering. Look how hard it is to live up to that value when you're dealing with invisible wounds. What does it actually require of us to live up to those values?
But some of it makes so much sense when in the book you explain some things, like the Theater of Dionysus is right next to the clinic.
Yeah.
Positioned next to the clinic.
Yeah.
And these are open air amphitheaters.
Yeah.
So what Paul's screaming and David's screaming would be heard by the people in the clinic.
Going to get treatment.
To get treatment,
Yes.
right? So
I mean-
people in the audience who've experienced loss and trauma and grief and pain, and people in the clinics, especially in the Women of Trachmis. Trachmis is you're dealing with end of life issues and suicide.
Yeah, we'll be at Sloan Kettering on Monday doing it for oncologists. David's playing Heracles. Amy Ryan is playing the son. Yeah, I mean, look, the ancient antibiotics called the Paion is song. These plays were all sung. Nietzsche, in his Birth of Tragedy, talks about how the closest analog to Greek tragedy for him, because he loved Wagner so much, was Wagner. But it was in particular what he said, he called the sustained scream. And there's something musical and there's something sonic that occurs in these screams that transcends language, transcends barriers, transcends cultures. You do it in Japan, you do it in the Balkans, you do it in Cuba, and the response is always the same. There's something about the screams that seems to be essential that you're missing on the page, and you're often missing in nonprofit and commercial productions.
Well, but, right, I also think that's what I meant with Paul, that it must be something just so self-possessing and therapeutic, because in none of your other performances, either of you, do you get to do this? Is there ever screaming and wailing? There's nothing like this. I saw Matawan. There's nothing like that. There's, Brother from Another Planet. That's not, Sideways. We don't see these, we don't get these performances. I'm just going to keep rolling them out. So there is something unique to this. And I wonder, something else you mentioned to me that I think the audience should know, that, Sophocles was a general. George Washington believed also that the troops should see Greek tragedies.
Well, yeah, so George Washington famously staged a production of Cato's Tragedy by Joseph Addison, a 19th century writer, which is a
No favorite. God, I love it.
it was like the most
Then they
performed
loved
play of the
it.
19th century, and English-speaking audiences loved it. They loved it, and it's about obviously dying for the republic and your values, and it was used in a motivational, propagandistic way by Washington, not necessarily in the sort of healing way that we were trying to, but it was at Valley Forge when he staged it, where the troops were starving and freezing. And dying of dysentery, and it was meant to bring them together in ways that I think no other medium can.
Now, this has had so many iterations from your days as a college student of classics to the memoir, to these productions all over the world, to hospitals for hospice care workers, palliative care workers, prison corrections officers, and now there's a graphic novel. The Odyssey of Sergeant Jack Brennan, but this book too is for sale, and Brian will be around to sign them. Tell us a little about this most project. It seems as if you've taken this in as many artistic mediums as it can go. There may be more. And you've obviously found, or they have found you, communities in pain that says, Brian, heal us.
Well, I wish, So my producing partner, Phyllis Kaufman, with who I've worked for the last 7 years, and we came up with this vision that, that we'd re-author how a public health campaign could be authored, and then we'd move out into multiple platforms. And we always thought you could only reach, we've only had 70,000 soldiers, service members, veterans, and their families see theater of war. So, other media had to be utilized to deliver these messages. So we've been in a long dialogue with the military, the Department of Defense, about doing a graphic novel. And some of, I get to work with these wonderful, I feel so lucky, the best actors in the world. I mean, I'd choose them over Brando and Newman and all the greats, Gil Good, and also,
They're all no longer with us.
Yeah,
so you can only get us. We're available still.
But David wasn't objecting either. He
thought, well, we all feel so lucky to be doing this, and I feel lucky, so blessed. But on this graphic novel project, I got to work with a really great group of collaborators, some of whom are in the audience tonight: Jess Rullifson, Nick Bertozzi, Tom Baxter is one of our editors, and Alan Gershenfeld from Eline Media, and also General Sutton, who was part of these early discussions. They're here, we got funding from DARPA, from the wing of the Department of Defense that developed the internet, to do a graphic novel that would hopefully reach 7th graders to old age homes, but also be of use in military settings where people might want to go deeper after having a theater of war experience, or they weren't able to attend a performance. And it's a retelling of Homer's Odyssey from the perspective of a Marine to his squad on their last night in combat. And he's telling them his version, Jack Brennan, which is my great uncle's name, sort of in honor of him, who was a World War II veteran, that he's telling his version of the Odyssey, what's germane to what he thinks they will face as they return. Now, of course, in the Odyssey, it takes Odysseus 10 years to return from the war, and many of our troops get on planes and from the battlefield less than 24 hours later are back in shopping malls and in America facing just a radically different environment. And one of the central metaphors of the Odyssey is that it's possible to be home and still feel lost at sea. and that there are many metaphors in the Odyssey that, just like how Ajax turns out to be kitchen sink realism for many veterans and their spouses, the metaphors of the Odyssey aren't really metaphors. They're, the land of the lotus eaters is about becoming addicted to opioids or alcohol as a way of coping with your trauma or the dissociation you feel. The crimes, some of the violent acts of the Trojan War at the end of the sacking of the city sort of follow many of the troops home. The choices they made that seemed right at the time and probably were done according to protocol end up being the things that cut the deepest and haunt them. So this is a book about that in graphic form. It was released last week, and our hope is that it'll reach an even wider audience than the whole enterprise to date.
Well, you've also experimented with more contemporary plays. We've done Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams, and so we're now 2,500 years later. Can you tell the audience and those watching online, streaming live, whether the experience is just very different in showcasing contemporary dramas for drug addiction and domestic violence? It's a very different vocabulary. Where vocabulary itself is more compressed, and there seems to be less opportunity for the kinds of performances we saw today from David and Paul.
I mean, one of the first, so we went out searching for audiences with the first 3 projects we had mentioned, and then audiences started looking for us, and one of the first ones that came was the National Institutes of Health. And they said, a scientist named Nora Volkoff from National Institute on Drug Abuse and Addiction came and said, do you have a play that can help us confront doctors with their own prejudices against patients who are struggling with addiction? And we said, yeah, sure. Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night, Act 3, we'll do it. And we toured the country with, Diane Weiss, Deborah Winger, Blythe Danner, Kathy Chalfant, all these terrific, Katie Irby playing Mary Tyrone for these audiences of 1,000 doctors or psychologists or psychiatrists at a time. And make no mistake, Greek tragedy enters the American playwriting bloodstream and DNA through O'Neill. Yeah. That's when we finally came out of our adolescence as artists, as theater artists, and actually developed a spine.
Would he have acknowledged that?
Oh, no question. In fact, there was a member of the Provincetown Players named Jeb Cook, who was a classicist, who introduced O'Neill to the Oresteia, and that's how Morning became Electra, Becomes Electra became a play. And those final plays, the Moon for the Misbegotten and Iceman and Eugene O'Neill, they're Greek tragedies. I mean, they trade in the very same things. And while there's not the same wailing, there's the same pathos, the same depth of suffering. And what's so wonderful about the O'Neill Tyrone sort of autobiographical exploration that's happening in Long Day's Journey, which is about to be on Broadway with Jessica Lange and again, is that here are characters who are loving each other and lacerating each other with equal intensity. And I feel like anyone who belongs to a family can in some way respond and relate to that and what that's like. And certainly anyone who belongs to a family, whether it's Irish Catholic or North Korean, can, I think, identify with having some experience with addiction touching us all. So we've had a lot of success. We do Tennessee Williams for domestic violence, but we don't do Tennessee Williams Streetcar, the poker act, the poker night in New Orleans. We do it in Maine. We do it because there has to be distance.
I see.
And one of the principal tools of the work that we do is we're not saying to the audience, this is you. Right. This isn't documentary theater. This isn't the Laramie Project. We're asking you, what do you see of yourself in this extremely strange, distant object that actually has a cultural dissonance with who you are? And that puts people in a much safer space to make the connection.
And connects you to a different time period, a different geography entirely.
Yeah.
Let's take some questions from the audience. David, this is first for you. David, which ancient Greek figure do you most identify with?
Well, right now.
I know which one. Oh, yeah.
Right now. Yeah. Philoctetes.
That's your man.
My man at the moment. Yeah. No, they're, I think
Did either of you study much Greek drama before Brian roped you into this?
Well, Paul, you did a Bacchae in Seattle, right?
Did
like a one-man Bacchae or something?
Two-man Bacchae.
Two-man Bacchae, yeah.
I did a crazy version of the Bacchae once. I was in the Oedipus cycle, too. I was in Antigone. I'd done a little bit of it before.
Yeah.
No, I hadn't. This was
Yes.
So it's enriched your lives in many ways.
Oh, yeah.
extraordinarily. Yeah.
Paul, have you ever used Greek drama to prepare for any of your movie or TV roles? And then I love this bit. Too big to fail seemed pretty close to tragic.
Yeah, it's a tragedy in a lot of ways, that show. Yeah, I mean, just what it's about, the crazy money guys. No, but it's funny, you're talking about O'Neill. The closest thing I've done to this, I mean, I did The Iceman Cometh
On Broadway, yeah.
on Broadway,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
with Spacey a long
Spacey,
time ago.
yeah.
And it was the closest thing to it. And I do remember I played a interesting little character in it who doesn't really do much in the play. But then all of a sudden at the end, he has this extraordinary monologue out of nowhere. It's sort of, and I remember that the director did say to me, he said, you know, in the Greek tragedies, there's always the messenger or the woodsman or somebody comes on who's witnessed something horrifying. And they come in and they report it. And there are often these extraordinary moments, and they talk about this obscene thing that's literally happened obscena, off stage. And he said, I think this guy is that character. He runs on and says, I've seen this horrible, terrifying, awful, bloody mess of a thing. And in this case, it's his own life that he's seen. So it was an incredibly powerful way to think about the character. And it suddenly blew the character wide open and made him extraordinary. So it's there, and it's a great way to think about it.
Brian, if you could assign our next president to read one particular ancient Greek story or tragedy, which one would it be? And I think it's not about the Trump primary season, just something else.
Well, I think the Oresteia is, and it has been. I mean, there's a great story about Robert Kennedy on the night that Martin Luther King was assassinated in Detroit, quoting from Aeschylus's Agamemnon.
The first part.
And a quote that I can't pull from memory, but it's about how we learn through suffering, and it's about which, you know, that's the famous adage, you know, we learn through suffering, but it's also about, you know, it just gave a wider view to what was happening that night. And it's an apocryphal, I mean, it's not an apocryphal story, it actually happened, but part of the apocryphal story is that his quoting Aeschylus to that crowd actually quieted the crowd and created some empathy and understanding. I think the Oresteia, which is a play about the intergenerational curse of violence, and that asks the question, how do we as a society end the cycle of violence? Mm-hmm. How do we end the retaliatory violence that plagues our world still this day? And the play asks as many questions as it answers, because at the end of the play, the answer is through trial by jury and through some divine intervention. But we live in a society in which we have trial by jury, and we still have endless amounts of retaliatory violence that seem intergenerationally to be a curse.
Which is the Oresteia.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't help but I can't resist but ask a person who portrayed John Adams and a poor person that played Secretary of State Seward in the Lincoln administration. You have any thoughts about this year's election? What would Adams say? What would Seward? All right, I knew you weren't going.
Yeah.
I like this question. How would this group respond to the shift from traditional war to a modern era of global terrorism? And the reason I'm asking this is because I know that you've also shown this to drone pilots.
We have, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that those people are certainly not engaged in any warfare that the ancient Greeks could have ever imagined. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering whether you think it would, as war continues to become hyper-technical, whether these plays will still have the same resonance when it looks like a video game and not like people running at each other with swords and shields.
I mean, that's the part of the reason they work so well now is because of the novelty of sitting together in a room for 2 hours with our devices off and connecting as human beings. We, aside from maybe in some liturgical settings, we don't do that as a culture anymore, where we listen to each other and share stories. So in the instances we perform for drone pilots, or at NORAD, which is one of the most surreal places we've performed, where we're sitting on the nuclear arsenal, and there are people there who run it. People came forward and had really strong reactions, and I got the sense that the isolation of being a drone pilot actually needed this communalization more than maybe even the person who'd fought in a squad or with a group of people. And that the power of this model is it's about, I mean, Jonathan Shea says in Achilles in Vietnam, it's not about, hey, you veteran, you shoulder the pollution of what came back from war on your shoulders alone. It's about we're going to come together as a community, regardless of our belief, our what we feel about the foreign policy decisions that sent us to war. We're going to acknowledge that we're a nation, and we're going to collectively shoulder this pollution together as a community. And that's why 1/3 of the population of Athens was sitting in those seats during that time in a democracy that was so highly militarized. I think it would be impossible for us to even understand what it would be like to live in those conditions.
David, I'm going to come back to a question I asked, but this was asked in a different way, and let's try it again, because I think it's worth it. I think people here are interested. Your reading just now, and we're referring to both of you in this case, was so amazing. How is it possible? Tell us the process that you can embody the experience of these characters so deeply.
Well,
how is it done? Have either of you served in the military?
no, I hadn't.
Have either of you suffered losses from the military in a personal way?
Directly, no. No, indirectly, yes, but no. I've learned from hearing other actors do this and doing it in places with military audiences. It's sort of I've learned by the response, what they hear and how they respond to this material, what triggers something. And so it's really on-the-job training.
Really?
Yeah. I mean,
Even while you're doing it?
each time?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, each time I read it, you know, how many words this was, to 200, 300 words or something, it comes alive again. Different phrases. It's the music that you're talking about. The music of the scream is infinite. And the more times we do it, the more permutations you hear. And having the privilege to do this over and over, it's like, oh, here's your favorite song that you get to sing. Or you get to go, all right, here I'm going to look at this favorite painting. It may not be favorite, but you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
And you know what it's done before, and you try to hit those notes, and every time you kind of grow with it. That's what's extraordinarily delicious about. And Brian's translations, I've read a lot of translations. Yeah. They are to the bone.
That's a big part of it. Yeah.
It's a huge part of it. They sing to contemporary audiences more than any other translation.
They're very frank.
Frank.
Very
frank and direct.
Yeah.
And Paul, for you as well, similarly, the embodiment of the experience
for sure.
comes up each time something.
Absolutely, the feedback loop. It's a full operating loop between you.
But Paul, you've talked also about like being kind of wrecked after some of these performances too, like you know.
Yeah, the Job one, literally, my body hurt. My body felt weird for about. I remember talking to you after that. You too. Yeah. We felt. I mean, my.
This was the mega church one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I thought I'd done something to myself for about a week after. What did my whole body kept vibrating. I mean, it's really intense. It can be really intense.
Well, gentlemen, I must say, we all know that this is an extraordinary public service and public health benefit that you've provided to the world. And you've, along the way, reclaimed the words and wisdom of the ancient Greek dramatists. And that's important because for many of us, we really didn't know these pieces. And certainly for tens of thousands of people in the audience would never have known the words of Sophocles and Aeschylus. And honestly, you know, you're actors and dramatists, but this is, and I think it's important to say this, that this is a true effort to heal the world, to heal the afflicted. And that's an incredible accomplishment. And I want to thank you for joining us here tonight. Thank you all.